rest. Now, I'm not talking about a nap later on this afternoon, which you're probably looking forward to, or you just didn't get enough sleep last night. I am talking about a kind of relief from the low-grade exhaustion that is always bubbling beneath the surface. Maybe it's been so long since you've had a deep kind of rest, you've just gotten used to living exhausted. As we read our teaching text, the first few lines of Psalm 23, He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. That as we read those words, maybe you realize you don't know that kind of rest. There is a gap between your lived experience and this picture of rest. Is the way you are currently living how Jesus intends for you to live? Is what you are experiencing what Jesus calls life and life to the full? Is feeling exhausted, overwhelmed, overworked, hurried, and anxious simply the life we must accept? Or is there a way of living that provides the rest we long for? Is there a practice from the life of Jesus that enables us to live out our calling and maintain margin and limits? Is there an invitation that as we follow our shepherd, he would make us lie down in green pastures, lead us to quiet waters, and refresh our souls? I'm so glad you asked. As a church, we are in partnership with Practicing the Way. We are in a new teaching series on the practice of Sabbath. As a reminder, the word Sabbath, or in Hebrew, Shabbat, carries a few definitions with it. And we will be exploring each of these in the coming weeks. They are stop, rest, delight, and worship. And last week, John got us kicked off in our series, which big hand for John. He did such a fantastic job with stopping. And today, I'm preaching on Sabbath as rest. Now, there are a few reasons why we decided to lean into this conversation around the practice of Sabbath. First is because of the Scriptures. The Scriptures have much to say about the Sabbath, and if we are people who take the Word of God seriously, we must seriously consider the Sabbath. As John talked about last week, Sabbath is both weaved into the rhythm of creation and is one of the 10 Commandments, and often the one we brag about breaking. The second reason is for our apprenticeship to Jesus. Simply put, Jesus practiced the Sabbath. And if we are to be his followers, that means we want to at least be like Jesus, become like Jesus, and do the things that Jesus did, which means we must consider heavily the Sabbath. Thirdly, is because of pastoral need. In conversation after conversation, there is a common thread pastorally in this community that we are chronically exhausted. The most common responses I get to "how are you" are busy and tired. Busy and tired. When I preached a sermon on Sabbath last year, it is a sermon by far I got the most responses from and the most resistance to, which leads me to my last point, which is this. We're preaching on the Sabbath as a way of prophetic resistance. If our church is to be a city on a hill, the salt of the earth, to live faithfully into the way of Jesus, then we must be able to name and resist the idols of our day. And so as a way of entering into this, we are resisting against the idols of our culture, which in the about decade that I've been preaching, there are 4 idols that always stir up controversy. They are the idol of politics, the idol of sex, the idol of money, and lastly, the idol of success. People are totally cool with me preaching to love your enemies and the different aspects of the way of Jesus. But the moment we mention any one of four of those idols, something stirs up every single time. Now, I realize this conversation around Sabbath brings up a ton of questions. And so I want to address some of those today. But with that being said, brothers and sisters, do not be deceived. The God of American success is alive and well, and it will do anything to keep you in its grasps. We live in a culture of exhaustion. The entire system is set up to continue to take more and more and more of you. It is shaped by its unrelenting pace. John touched on last week how our sleep has changed over the last few decades. Like one of the things that you do is when you read historical things about, believers in the past and you hear them waking up at 4 a.m. to contend in prayer. You're like, my gosh, how did they do that? They went to bed at 6 p.m. That's not that crazy, right? There was no electricity or Wi-Fi or things of that nature. They just blew out their candle and went to bed when the sun went down, They were not going to bed at 11:30 after binge watching a couple hours of Netflix and then trying to get up at 4 in the morning. So that's one caveat, right? And that's how sleep has changed. But not only has our rest changed, but our work has changed dramatically over the last several decades. In the 1960s, as people were beginning to imagine the future, they imagined a future not of more work, but actually of more rest. As the innovations of the dishwasher and different time-saving devices, labor-saving devices were coming on the forefront, people were predicting that in our time now, Americans would work between an average of 22 to 27 hours a week, 27 being on the top end of things as a really full week. But today, the average American works more than 4 weeks per year than they did in 1979. We are working way more than before. There was also a time in the not-so-distant past where everything was closed on Sunday, not just Chick-fil-A. Literally, everything was closed. And it wasn't just a part of the culture, it was a part of legislature. There was something known as blue laws, which forbid people from being open on Sundays. Some of you remember a time where you could not go shopping on a Sunday. There was nothing else open. And then with the emergence of 7-Eleven, that was insane that there would be a place open that late and open that frequently. And now that is just a memory of the past. As we embark deeper into a consumer culture, we have done away with blue laws, and we have invested ourselves into a culture of work. Now, this pace of work has led to what the Japanese call karoshi. Karoshi is a phenomena which literally means, the word translated literally means death by overwork. Every year, hundreds of people die from overworking. The main issues of karoshi are that of heart attack, stroke, and starvation, where you literally work so much you forget to eat and die. There was a story in 2013 of a woman by the name of Miwa Sadhu. I am so sorry if I butchered her name, but she worked as a broadcaster at a headquarters in Tokyo. And in 1 month, she logged over 159 hours of overtime, only taking 2 days off, which led to her dying from heart failure in July of 2013. She was 31 years old. There was also the story of Kenji Hamada, who was an employee at a security company, and his typical week involved 15-hour workdays and a grueling 4-hour commute. And then one day, he was found slumped over his desk. His colleagues thought that he was asleep, but when he hadn't moved for several hours, they realized he had died. He died of a heart attack at age 42. Now, when this was emerging in the late 80s, they came up with this title of karoshi because hundreds of people were dying of this. And this was a phenomenon taking place in Japan. And you want to know the crazy thing? Americans work 137 more hours than the Japanese per year. 260 more hours per year than the Brits, and 499 more hours than the French. That is the current pace we are going at. Wayne Mueller says this: a successful life has become a violent enterprise. We make war on our bodies, pushing them to their limits. War on our children because we cannot find enough time to be with them when they are hurt and afraid, and need to be with them when they are hurt and afraid and need our company. War on our spirit because we are too preoccupied to listen to the quiet voices that seek to nourish and refresh us. War on our communities because we are fearfully protecting what we have and do not feel safe enough to be kind and generous. War on the earth because we cannot take the time to place our feet on the ground and allow it to feed us, to taste in its blessing and give thanks. A successful life has become a violent enterprise. This pace has brought about something called hurry sickness, which I have brought this up before, and this is some great work that John Mark Comer has done on the topic. But hurry sickness is essentially this: a behavior characterized by the continual rushing and anxiousness. Here are 10 marks of hurry sickness. First is irritability. You get way too annoyed, way too fast about absolutely nothing. Secondarily, hypersensitivity. Minor things quickly escalate into major emotional events. Third, restlessness. You can't relax even when you try. You always feel this incessant need to be doing, producing, going. Next is workaholism. You can't or won't stop working. Even when you're out of the office and away from the desk, you're constantly working in your mind. Emotional numbness. You don't have the bandwidth or capacity to feel feelings of another person or even for yourself. Out of order priorities. You find your life always having to address the urgent, and it's always taking precedent over the important. There's also lack of care for your body. You are in such a hurry, you don't have time to do the basics, like eating properly, sleeping properly, resting properly. There is also that of escapist behavior. You find yourself at the end of the night, instead of being alone in the quiet to calm down, binge watching Netflix, overeating food that's terrible for you, over drinking, etc., etc. There's also a slippage of spiritual disciplines. You find yourself hurry sick when the first things to go is your time with God. And lastly, isolation. You feel disconnected from God, others, or even yourself. How'd you score on that? Relatively high. In the midst of all of this, there is something underneath it all. It is the engine that drives this culture of exhaustion, and is this voice that causes us to run from rest. I realize all of this may sound kind of strange, but hear me in this. There is a lie that drives the culture that we live in, and it's this. Ready? You are only as good as what you do. Now, I'm not specifically talking about a certain occupation, though it can be related to that. But I'm talking about this in a more general way. There is this constant pressure to always perform and be productive. The world we live in today's mantra is this: what have you done for me lately? It's a famous Janet Jackson song, I'm aware, right? What have you done for me lately? The fear is that if I am not performing or producing, then I will not be loved or needed. Many of us run from rest, not because we don't long for it. We absolutely do, but because we are afraid of what will happen if we get it. Some of you come from a family of origin where being successful is how you got attention, approval, or love. And so you've attached your identity, who you are, to what you do. And it is the only way that you could earn love. Some of you live in constant fear that if you were to take your foot off the gas, you would lose everything. So you must keep going. You have to keep going. Some of you live with the worry that if you stop to rest, they will realize they don't need you anymore, and you will be dismissed. Others of us live with the weight of the world on our shoulders. And if you step away, your worries, well, it'll all become crumbling down. Hear me in this, brothers and sisters. You are not what you do. You are who you are loved by. You are not what you do. You are who you are loved by. Your worth and value do not come from what you can produce with your hands. It comes from the one who made you. And he declares, you are worthy. You are worthy of love and affection. You are worthy of time and presence. You are worthy of a future and a hope. You are worthy of rest. And it's into this culture of exhaustion comes this invitation to rest. And this invitation to rest is the practice of Sabbath. Now, last week, John talked about Sabbath as stopping and as a rhythm in creation in one of the 10 Commandments. Today, I want to talk about Sabbath as an invitation into rest, as resistance against this culture of exhaustion. Now, to better understand what Sabbath is, I want us to turn to Deuteronomy 5. It'll be on the screens if you don't have your Bibles. It says this, observe the Sabbath day by keeping it holy, as the Lord God has commanded you. 6 days you shall labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is a Sabbath to the Lord your God. On it you shall not do any work, neither you, your son, or your daughter, nor your male servant, or male or female servant, nor your ox, your donkey, or any of your other animals, nor any foreigner residing in your town, so that your male and female servants may rest as you do. Remember that you were slaves in Egypt, and that the Lord your God brought you out of there with a mighty hand and an outstretched arm. Therefore, the Lord your God has commanded you to observe the Sabbath day. So there's 4 movements I want us to track in this passage, and they're this. What is the Sabbath? Observing the Sabbath. Sabbath is for everyone, and remember you're free. First, what is the Sabbath? To put it in the most plain language, Sabbath is a 24-hour block of time in which we stop work, enjoy rest, practice delight, and worship God. Eugene Peterson says it this way: Sabbath is that uncluttered time and space in which we distance ourselves from our own activities to see what God is doing. Now, like a lot of other things, Sabbath carries with it some baggage, and I would like to address some of those objections and baggage now. I realize as we talk about practicing Sabbath, some red flags might be rising in you, and what about it? How come? And I want to address some of those concerns now. First, aren't we free from keeping the Sabbath? The short answer is yes. There are some who, in hearing me say this, and hearing me talk about the practice of Sabbath, are worrying that somehow we're earning God's favor, or we're being asked to keep a law that we've been set free of. So they're like, time out, hold on. Hear me in this. Let me be perfectly clear. Because of Jesus' work for us, the law has been fulfilled. He has crossed every T and dotted every I. The law has been fulfilled in Jesus, and there's nothing we could do to earn God's love or his favor or worth with him. We stand justified because of Jesus' work on the cross, period. And so this practice of Sabbath is not out of a place of striving or wanting to attain or obligatory to the law, but instead it is found, the reason we practice Sabbath is because of Jesus himself. So, just because we don't have to keep the Sabbath anymore doesn't mean we shouldn't keep the Sabbath anymore. Yes, you don't have to keep the Sabbath, and you're free to do that all on your own. And the Sabbath is not like other ceremonial laws or impurity laws in the Old Testament. They're not to be set aside like we've done with eating pork or whatever. It is different because it's woven into the fabric of creation, practiced in the life of Jesus, and modeled by the early church. Wayne Mueller says this: the Sabbath is not a burdensome requirement from some law-giving deity. You ought, you better, you must, but rather a remembrance of a law that is firmly embedded in the fabric of nature. It is a reminder of how things really are, the rhythmic dance to which we unavoidably belong. The Sabbath is simply a practice of wisdom and joy. So I want us to reframe the conversation. You don't have to keep the Sabbath. You get to. It's a relief. It's a joy. It's a gift. Now, Let's take a step back a little bit further. I realize that as we're talking about this, all sorts of resistance is rising up. Now, let's just say for the sake of argument, I'm wrong. I don't think I am, but let's just say that I am, right? I'm totally wrong here. What am I advocating for? A 24-hour period where you worship and rest, where you worship the Lord your God and you rest. So even at the end of all of this, let's say I totally blew it and I was wrong. All I've advocated for is for you to rest in the Lord your God and to worship him. What's been lost? You know what I mean? What's been lost at all of that? Now, I have a feeling that the resistance doesn't come from theological concerns, though we can address those further. And I don't think that it comes from the common sense reality of what I'm inviting into you. But here's what I think it really comes from. Sabbath steps on all the idols of American culture. What we worship here as Americans is power, success, productivity. And Sabbath steps on all of those. I told you, when I preach about those four things, I always find resistance. Because the reality is, in many of those scenarios, those idols have sunk their teeth into followers of Jesus. And when we address those teachings of Jesus and those ways of the scriptures, it confronts those idols, and the idols do not like it. They do not want to lose their grasp on you. And so when I talk about the Sabbath, this is not an indictment about your love for God, but more a call to consider how the culture around you has shaped you and how it's had influence on you. A.J. Swoboda says, "It is not as though we do not love God. We love God deeply. We just don't know how to sit with God anymore." This is at the heart of it all. Being with God over doing for him. The practice of Sabbath helps us keep our lives in perspective. Brothers and sisters, I do not want to get to the end of all of this and have missed the plot. In my conversations with a lot of people, it is merely about getting them to see their lives from a taken back perspective. In the day in, day out grind of life, we're always concerned about what's urgent. The pressing matters of work and family and life and all of these other things. And oftentimes the urgent take over what's important. If I get to the end of this journey and I've led the church well and the church has grown and is financially stable and all that good stuff, but my wife doesn't know how much I loved her, I failed. If when my kids turned 18, they were never in a dirty house, food was always provided on the table, but I never took time to play with them and make memories together, I failed. If I get to the end of this life, having worked and strived, and there's converts because of the work that we've done here, and the city has changed because of what Zion done here, but I did not spend time enjoying the presence of God, I missed it. I missed it. And I don't want to miss the plot. The invitation to rest is to observe the Sabbath. Now, this first phrase, observe the Sabbath in Deuteronomy 5, that first word observe is a word you are already familiar with. It is the Hebrew word shamar, which means to guard and to protect. This is the same word that God tells Adam and Eve in the garden. They are to shamar the Garden of Eden, to observe and to protect. And this same word is given to this commandment of the Sabbath. Now, it means to protect, to guard, to watch over. Why? Because your rest is constantly under attack. This is most clear in how the church in recent years, specifically in the West, has abandoned this practice. Again, Swoboda says this: Sabbath is the ancient idea and practice of intentional rest that has long been discarded by much of the church in our world. Sabbath is not new. Sabbath is just new to us. Historically, Christians have kept some form or another of the Sabbath for some 2,000 years, but it has been largely forgotten by the church, which has uncritically mimicked the rhythms of the industrial and success-obsessed West. Say that 10 times fast. The result of our Sabbath amnesia is that we have become perhaps the most emotionally exhausted, psychologically overworked, and spiritually malnourished people in history. We must guard our rest because it matters and things are clawing and scratching for it. Secondly, Sabbath is for everyone. Notice the rest of the command says that the Sabbath is for you. It's for your kids. It's for the employees. It's for your animals. It's for refugees. Sabbath is for everyone. It's not just the people who can afford to do it or who can do it because they have enough margin. It is for everyone. Where there are systems of injustice that are set to exploit others, Sabbath frees people to rest. Sabbath is this invitation for all people. Sabbath is for your kids. Now, we had this really beautiful moment with Ben on Friday. Celeste is driving him to school. And on his way to school, Ben tells Celeste, I cannot wait for our rest tonight, where we light our candle and we rest. Sabbath is for our kids. Sabbath is for your employees. I know in bringing up Chick-fil-A, I have created a hunger in you. For that, I apologize. And that is a desire that will not be satisfied on this day, right? Because they're closed on Sunday, right? As famous Kanye West said. But anyways, that desire, that longing will have to wait until another day. And that is absolutely okay. We live in a world where we think the demand of now supersedes the need for rest, and that is a lie from the pit of hell. Business owners, managers, leaders, give your people rest they need it. And here's what you watch will happen. Do you think Chick-fil-A has suffered from being closed on Sunday? Are they closing down branches because of this? No, they're expanding more and more. Partially because that chicken is fire, but also I think because they honor the rest that is needed. It's even for your animals, which sounds, I know, strange to some of you, but they long for rest. It is a rhythm as a part of creation. If you overwork an animal, they will deteriorate faster than you know. It's also for the land. We are facing huge crises right now in terms of agriculture because the way that we've overused the land and not given proper time to rest. And so there's things like regenerative farming, which are coming up now to try and help cure some of this industrial farming issues. Not to get into that today, but the land needs rest as well. It's also for refugees. These are people who typically and categorically cannot afford rest because they're clawing and scratching just to make a way, and rest is for them. Now, I realize that when we talk about Sabbath, it can kind of feel like, well, it must be nice to be able to do that, especially for those of us who sit maybe beneath the poverty line or who struggle financially, who say, I can't take a day off because I can't afford it. Every Sunday, you and I read some words, and a part of those words are written out of Acts chapter 2, and they are that we give generously here so that no one among us would have a need. If there is someone in our body who cannot afford to take a single day off, something is wrong here. And it's our responsibility as followers of Jesus to meet that need, to alleviate that from our brother and sister or sister. Lastly, is to remember that you are free. When you rest, it means you are free. The practice of Sabbath served as a reminder for God's people that they are set free. In the biblical narrative, Pharaoh, who ruled over them in Egypt, was a cruel tyrant who demanded more and more from the people of God. If you read one chapter, Exodus 5, it is like 6 or 7 times that Pharaoh is demanding more work, faster work, harder work, more production, now. Because when you are a slave of the tyranny of now, there is no freedom and there is no rest. And Jesus is inviting us to rest. So when we partake in the Sabbath, it is reminding ourselves that it is for all of us, but also it's that so that we don't become a slave driver ourselves. That Sabbath isn't just for me, but it's for everyone. Now, brothers and sisters, hear me in this. Pharaoh is alive and well. And the practice of Sabbath is a call to become a community of rest and a culture of exhaustion. Now, the practice of Sabbath functions as a line in the sand where we say enough. It is an act of resistance. Walter Brueggemann. Such faithful practice of work stoppage is an act of resistance. It declares in bodily ways that we will not participate in the anxiety system that pervades our social environment. We will not be defined by busyness and acquisitiveness and by pursuit of more in either of our economies or our personal relations or anywhere in our lives, because our life does not consist in commodity. To put it another way, rest is a war. Now, when we practice Sabbath, we declare war on the idols of our day, and we dethrone them from our hearts. This is an embodied resistance against the powers that be, the practices of our culture, and the pace of the world all around us. When we practice Sabbath, we declare profoundly two things. First, I am human. That may sound strange. You may not think you need to be reminded of that this morning, but I have a feeling that you do, because we often live like we are machines, that we can go and go and go, and there is not any consequences to that. Brothers and sisters, you will only ever be exactly human-sized, which means you need to stop, you need to rest, you need to delight, and you need to worship. You are a finite being, which means you have ends. You have limits. You have bandwidth. Tish Harrison Warren says this: our bodily limits are our chief reminder that we are but dust. We inhabit a frail, vulnerable humanity, and we hate being reminded. You can run from Sabbath, and feel free to do so if that's what you want to do, but it's woven into the fabric of creation, so guess what? You won't get very far. A.J. Swoboda, our need for rest is like gravity. It just is. Our feeling and opinions cannot change it. Humans need rest. Animals need rest. Land needs rest. And without rest, things will cease to exist as they should. Still, we may choose to ignore this need for a whole, but gravity always wins. You know this experience too well. Your body shuts you down when you have been ignoring this fundamental rule to creation. You've been working and working and grinding and no time off and no rest, and suddenly what happens? You get sick. Your body says, psych, and you go out for the count. And suddenly, all these plans, all these aspirations, all these things to do come to a screeching halt, and you cannot get out of bed. John Mark says it this way: Sabbath is coming for you, whether as delight or discipline. You will Sabbath one way or the other. You might as well make it a part of your life. You might as well lean into that intentionally. So when we Sabbath, here's what we claim: I'm human. I'm not a machine. I'm not here just to produce. I'm here for much more than that. Secondly, we declare this: I am not God. Again, I don't think anybody here walked in this morning under that assumption. However, we often live that way. Marva J. Don says, when we cease working, we dispense with the need to create our own future. When we Sabbath, it is an embodied reminder, I am not in control. It is a declaration of trust in the living God. When we do not rest, what are we trying to do? We are trying to build security for ourselves. Sabbath comes along and says, I trust God with my future. For the Jewish people, the practice of Sabbath has kept them as a community of rest in the culture of exhaustion. Pete Scazzero says this: the Sabbath was always a hallmark of the Jews throughout their history. This one act, perhaps more than any other, has kept them from the pressure of the powerful cultures that sought to assimilate them. For this reason, it is often said, for 3,500 years, the Sabbath has kept the Jews more than Jews have kept the Sabbath. Rest is war. You have to fight for it. Secondly, rest is a practice. Sabbath is a practice, which means it's not meant to be lived simply on a page. It's meant to be a lived reality. Now, I realize all sorts of questions come up, and I want to answer some of those now. First, Well, what about work? I have done a ton of teachings on a theology of work and how important that is. So what I'm not saying in this teaching is that work doesn't matter. Work is vitally important. It is a way that we are made, but hear me in this, it is not ultimate. It is what we do, and it's an important, integrated part of that, but it is not who we are. And so there's plenty of sermons on that, so please go and listen to those things. But I don't want you guys hearing that I'm saying that work doesn't matter. I don't think it's important because I think it is, but it should not be worshipped. And pastorally speaking, I'm not super worried about a culture of laziness here. I'm more concerned about worshiping our work. Secondly, what does Sabbath look like? Now, I want to be clear. I'm here to cast vision for what Sabbath can look like. I'm not here to give you a set of rules of what Sabbath looks like in your world. You're going to have to import these ideas into your own world and have them function according to your stage of life and all of those things. So, for a lot of people, Sundays typically work best for their Sabbath, that they could start Saturday night and end Sunday night, kind of getting ready for work or whatever the next morning. That doesn't work for me and my family because, newsflash, today is a work day for me, right? Happy to be with you guys today, but today is like a Monday for me, you know? I just came off of my Sabbath. So for me and my family, Sabbath begins Friday night. We begin our Sabbath, Celeste and myself, in this season of life by actually starting with date night. Our boys get to start their Sabbath with their grandparents, eating really sweet food, I'm sure, and watching movies that they enjoy, having all that good time. Shalom for them, you know? And Celeste and I begin reconnecting over a meal, talking about life together. We often light a candle as a family to begin Sabbath, and there's nothing like super transcendent or holy about that. It's just a reminder for us that the presence of God is with us as we enter into this time. It says this time is holy and sacred. And it's one of the things our kids look forward to the most is the lighting of the candle to say we are entering into Sabbath rest. On Saturday morning, we try our very best to sleep in. Our kids have other opinions about that, you know, but we try our best to sleep in. Occasionally they'll stay over at the grandparents', which means some sleep in, but sometimes they don't. And they like to get up at 7 for whatever reason, and so that's what they like to do. It is what it is. And then all day Saturday is just about doing things that fill us with joy and gratitude, doing things that feel like rest and worship. And that can look like all sorts of different activities. And so what I don't want to do is paint a picture where like Sabbath is like Edenic in nature. Like we just float around and it's just this beautiful thing and nothing bad ever happens. It's like my kids still fight over toys on Sabbath, right? If they like dump all the goldfish on the ground, I'm not like, till after Sabbath. It's like, we got to pick it up now, you know? And so there are things that come up on Sabbath. Unfortunately, we still have to discipline on the Sabbath. You know, it's not the purge in our house on the Sabbath and kids do whatever they want, right? We got to like rein some things in. And there are times, sure, that we don't get the rest we kind of want. We don't get to take a nap and do the things, but we shift our bodies towards that direction. One of the things that we like to do with our kiddos on the Sabbath is we like to give them something sweet. I told you guys multiple times about my youngest love for snacks and things that are sweet, but we try to intentionally do things like that. And this is in tradition where Jewish fathers would get spoonfuls of honey for their kids. And this was like a very special treat for them. A very expensive treat, but you would give each kid a spoonful of honey on the Sabbath so that they always remember and associate Sabbath with sweetness. And so we try to do stuff like that too, where it's chocolate chip pancakes for breakfast or whatever for our kiddos. And so all we are trying to do is shift our hearts towards rest. Now, that's what our Sabbath kind of looks like. Yours might look totally different. It may be on a Tuesday because of your work schedule. I don't know. But the whole goal is to posture yourself towards rest. The next question that comes up is, what if things aren't done? That's kind of the point. Your list will never end, right? Has laundry ever stopped for anyone? Dishes, chores, sweeping, cleaning up? Didn't think so. There'll always be things to do. When you intentionally rest, you say, I am not a machine, and it's okay if things are left undone. A super stressful thing for me is sometimes on Friday evenings around 4 o'clock, the sermon isn't done. Guess what? The sermon isn't done. It'll have to wait for another time because this is more important. And everything in me is, wow, I could get another hour. I could do this. Kill that. There's this need for me to have to perform and be done. It is okay if things are left undone. Because I'm not called to live a perfect life. I'm called to be with Jesus. And that means I learn how to rest. And so it's okay if things are left undone. Now, also, the pressure of Sabbath coming helps you get things done in a faster manner. If you're a procrastinator, you realize, I have till Friday night at 5. So usually around 3 o'clock, things get like a frenzy in our house. We're trying to whip things up and get things clean to get us ready for the Sabbath. And so it helps you kind of reorganize your week so that you can truly enjoy rest on the Sabbath. Now, caveat. Obviously, emergencies come up. Things happen. But those should be the exception, not the rule. Next, what exactly counts as rest? These are my workaholics talking, asking this question. It's super restful for me to respond to emails on the weekend. Wrong, right? That idol of work rises up in you. And you're like, it's not that big of a deal. It's like super restful to go and like plant a garden in the backyard today. It's like probably not, right? Probably considered work. Now, there's all sorts of things in that. I realize there's some people with dispositions and personalities where that would be super restful. You know what you're trying to do. You know if you're trying to sneak in work under the guise of rest. Right? And so I'm not going to be knocking on your door, put that down, that's rest, right? It's on you to do that. But you're only robbing yourself. So if you're not honest with yourself and the people you live with, and they know. And so who are you trying to kid? Just enjoy the rest. That can wait. It really, really can. And so we will talk about what rest looks like more next week, but that's the essential idea. Now, let's land this plane. If you would join me now, I want to come back to the place we started, Psalm 23. And I want you to now view it through the lens of this invitation of rest to Sabbath. And I just want to read it over you slowly. And I want you to let the words kind of just seep down into your being. And I want you to engage your imagination in this too. That it's not just words on a page, but it's an actual place. It's a place that God is inviting you into to come and to be with him. So would you just join me in closing your eyes? The Lord is my shepherd. I lack nothing. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He refreshes my soul. I want to read a prayer over you guys that I read in one of my favorite books on prayer. If you just allow these words to wash over you and become your prayer as well. O God, gather me now to be with you as you are with me. Soothe my tiredness. Quiet my fretfulness. Curb my aimlessness. Relieve my compulsiveness. Let me be easy for a moment. Release me from the fears and guilt which grip me so tightly, from the expectations and opinions which I so tightly grip, that I may be open to receiving what you give, to risking something genuinely new, to learning something refreshingly different. O God, gather me to be with you as you are with me. Forgive me for claiming so much for myself that I leave no room for gratitude, for confusing exercises and self-importance with acceptance of self-worth, for complaining so much about my burdens that I become a burden, for competing against others so insidiously that I stifle celebrating them and receiving their blessing through their gifts. O God, gather me to be with you as you are with me. Keep me in touch with myself, with my needs, my anxieties, my angers, my pains, my corruptions, that I may claim them as my own rather than blame them on someone else. O Lord, deepen my wounds into wisdom. Shape my weakness into compassion. Gentle my envy into enjoyment. My fear into trust. My guilt into honesty. O God, gather me to be with you as you are with me.